Well, good afternoon, everyone. When we were talking about the theme, when Father Pat and Faith and I were thinking about the theme, and we were thinking about, what the talks are going to be on, and who was going to do what talk, and so forth and so on, I had a talk about going into a little more about our call and our response. We heard from Jesse this morning about what does it mean to be called by name? What does it mean to have the relationship with the Good Shepherd? And then Father Pat later on this morning talked about unconditional love that Jesus has for each and every one of us. Doesn't matter who we are, doesn't matter what we've done, Jesus loves each and every one of us. It's an audacious love. It's a love really that the world doesn't understand. But it's a love that God has for all of us. And so this afternoon I want to explore a little bit about our call and a little bit about our response. So we've been reflecting this weekend about how we're being called. Are we listening? Do we hear Jesus call us by name? Do we hear Jesus speak his words of love to us? And how do we want to respond? How are we going to respond to his call? So I'd like to continue with a reading from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 10. After this, the Lord appointed 72 others whom he sent ahead of him in pairs to every town and place he intended to visit. He said to them, "The harvest is abundant, but the laborers are few. So ask the master of the harvest to send out laborers for his harvest. Go on your way. Behold, I am sending you like lambs among wolves. Carry no money bag, no sack, no sandals. Greet no one along the way. Into whatever house you enter, first say, 'Peace to this household.' If a peaceful person lives there, your peace will rest on him. But if not, it will return to you. Stay in the same house and eat and drink what is offered to you, for the laborer deserves his payment. Do not move about from one house to another. Whatever town you enter and they welcome you, eat what is set before you, cure the sick in it, and say to them, 'The kingdom of God is at hand for you.'" So if Jesus was to say that in the year 2018, what would he say? No wallet, no credit card, no iPhone, no smartphone, no stupid phone, no cell phone, no iPad, no iPod, no Game Boy, nothing. Nothing to be communicated with all the world, nothing to keep you connected, and no kind of money, right? All the things that we would never dream about going without, traveling anywhere without, Jesus says, go without. You don't need to take them. So what is he saying to us? Well, for me, one of the things he's saying to us is, absolutely, those things that you think are absolutely necessary for be with you wherever you are, you don't need them. You don't need them. A couple weeks ago, or maybe a couple months ago, Father Pat and I went to a movie. And my phone was charging in my room, and so we were getting into the car, and I said, "Oh, I forgot my phone." So I rushed to get my phone. And then I asked myself, why am I rushing to get my phone? All I'm going to do is go to the movie theater, and it's going to tell me to turn off my phone. Why do I need that? But we think we need it. And Jesus says, no, you don't need it. You don't need those things as much as you need me. Put your trust in me. Don't put your trust in the stuff that you got. Don't put your trust in the money in your bank account. Don't trust your trust in the car you drive or the house you live in. Put your trust in me. But in light of what we've been looking at this weekend, I think he's also saying something very personal to us. Because what I hear Jesus saying is, money is a useful tool. It's what you need to pay the bills. It's what you need to get along. It's what you need to get all the necessities of life. You need money to live and survive and thrive in this world of the 21st century. You still need money. Money is a useful tool. And there are poor people who need help, financial assistance, so that they could get the necessities of life. So money is important. Money is a tool. But you know what? I'm not all that interested in sending my people money. Technology, incredible tool. Technology, a wonderful tool. Think about it, those of us who are old enough to remember when there was no internet, and to think about how incredible it seems that we can communicate with people thousands of miles away, across the whole world, instantaneously. This is dating myself, but if you remember when you were a kid, or I was a kid, reading the comics, Dick Tracy, this two-way wrist TV, right? It's here. It's here. Technology is a wonderful tool. Helps people communicate all over the world. But I'm not all that interested in sending my people technology. What I'm interested in is sending my people you. You're the gift I want to send to my people. You. You're the ones I want to send to share the good news about me. You're the ones I want to send to tell my story so that people know how much God loves them. I want you to go and share the hope you have in me. You're the gift I want to send. You're the gift I want to give to my people. You. Not the stuff that you got. Not all the things at your disposal. All I really want to send them is you. I want to send you. So what would we say? Well, I can't imagine anybody in this room saying, no, Jesus. Nope, ain't going to do it. Nope. But I think we might find excuses not to go. We might be like Moses in chapter 3 of Exodus. He's tending sheep, and he sees this bush in the distance, and it's on fire, but it's not being consumed. So he says, I got to go check this out. So he goes and he checks it out, and he comes closer to the bush, and all of a sudden he hears the voice of God say, Moses, don't come any closer. Take your sandals off your feet. This is holy ground. Moses, I've heard the affliction of my people in Egypt. I have heard what they're suffering in Egypt. I want you to go to tell Pharaoh to let my people go. And Moses says, what? Lord, I'm not anybody. I'm a nobody. Who am I to go tell Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, to let your people go? Who am I? God says, Moses, don't worry. I'm going to be with you every step of the way, and I have nothing to worry about, but my people are crying out to me, and somebody has to go. Yeah, Lord, but when I go, they're going to ask me, who sent me? So who do I tell them sent me? God says, you tell them I am sent you. I am who I am, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is I am who sent you. Yeah, Lord, but they're not going to believe me when I go. They're not going to believe me that you sent me. Moses, what do you have in your hand? I have my staff. Okay, throw it on the ground. Here comes a snake. All right, pick it up again. Here comes a staff. Okay, Moses, put your hand over your heart. Okay, take it away. It's full of leprosy. Okay, put it back. It's cleansed again. Moses, these are the kind of signs that are going to accompany you so that they'll know it is I who sent you. Yeah, Lord, but But, I don't talk very well. I'm not a public speaker. I can't, speak in sophisticated courts, a court of Pharaoh. And God says, don't you think I know that? Yeah, Lord, but can't you send somebody else? And God said, okay, Moses, this is what we're going to do. Okay, I know you can't speak well, but your brother Aaron, he can speak well. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you what to say, you tell Aaron what to say, and Aaron will say it. But just go. Or there's Jeremiah. First chapter, beginning of the book of the prophet Jeremiah, God calls Jeremiah and says, Jeremiah, I want you to proclaim my word to the people. I want you to be my prophet. And Jeremiah says, I'm too young. And God says, don't say I'm too young. You're not too young. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to set you like a pillar of iron, a pillar of brass. I'm going to set you because when I'm going to tell you to tell them, they're not going to want to hear it. But no matter what they do to you, Jeremiah, I'll be with you. And they can't touch you. And then, this is, Jesse talked about Peter earlier this morning. And again, so we remember, right? Jesus is teaching the crowds from Peter's boat. And he tells Peter to throw nets over a catch. And Peter says, we've been at it all day. And they throw the net over a catch. And the catch is so big, their boat almost sinks. The other boat that they have, it almost sinks. And the first thing Peter says is, Lord, leave me, I'm a sinful man. Jesus, you don't want to have anything to do with me. You don't know where I've been. You don't know what I've done. You don't know what kind of a person I am. Believe me, you don't want to hang around with the likes of me. You better just leave. And Jesus says, don't be afraid. From now on, you'll be catching people. See, all these people had reasons why they couldn't go. All these people had reasons why they couldn't do what God asked them to do. They all found out reasons why they weren't up to the task or why they didn't have what it takes. When I was a pastor in Alabama, there were some people in the parish, and we had a very small parish, but there were people in the parish I thought would be a good Eucharistic minister or a good lector at Mass or maybe run some program in the parish. And I would ask them to do that or consider that or whatever it is. And some of them would say to me, oh, Father, I'm not worthy. And what I should have said was, no, you're not. But neither am I. You see, it doesn't matter whether we think we're worthy or not. It matters about whether we're called. It matters about whether we're called. Again, for those of you who don't know my story, I was born and raised in New Jersey. I mentioned that. I got a chemical engineering degree from Ohio U, and I worked as a chemical engineer in Carbondale, Illinois. And there I met the Passionists. And I felt a vocation, and it'll make a long story very short. I joined the Passionists, went into formation with the Passionists, and so I was ready to go to the novitiate. And the novitiate is where you discern about whether to take vows or not, and the community discerns about whether they'll want you to take vows or not. And so we had our novitiate. There are two provinces in the U.S. We just call them the East and the West. But so the novitiate was in Massachusetts, in a town called Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, close to Worcester. So anyway, we drive to Shrewsbury. And there are 5 of us. We drive to Shrewsbury, we drop off our stuff, we pick our rooms, and then we have to go to Chicago for this pre-novitiate thing for 3 weeks. So we went to Shrewsbury, and we drive all the way back to Chicago, and we have this 3-week program, and it's led by Father John Render, who's since passed away. and a seminarian from the Eastern Province, Joe McIntyre, who did not persevere with us. So, 3-week program, and one of the things that we had to do when we were there was interview one of the older Passionists. Because that was a mother house for a province, so there was still quite a few guys living there on Harlem Avenue in Chicago. So Father David, some of you may know Father David. Father David was here, I think, as a deacon or maybe as a priest for a short time. Anyway, Father David interviewed Father James Patrick White. Now, Father James Patrick White was born in Massachusetts, and he applied to join the Passionists in the Eastern Province, but he had some bone condition or something like that, and they were afraid about his health, so they rejected him. So he decided that he was going to apply to our province, and we accepted him. Well, it turns out that Father James Patrick White became our provincial superior in the 50s when we sent missionaries to Japan and Korea and all sorts of places. And then after time off, he was reelected again to be provincial again for another 2 terms in the 60s, lived to be 80-something years old. So obviously health didn't wind up being that bad of a problem. But he was a great pillar in our province. I interviewed Father Myron Goldman. Father Myron was what we call the vicar of the house, which meant he was like the vice superior of the house. And Father Myron, if you looked at him, I mean, he looked emaciated most of the time. He was a very skinny guy and a very quiet guy. He was a great athlete in his time, very competitive guy, and he was a great card player. Father Myron was the kind of card player who knew your cards before you knew them. But again, he was a very quiet guy, and when I was getting to know the Passionists more and more, I began to realize, well, this is a preaching order. Can I fit in a preaching order? Don't say it. So I heard Father Myron's story. Well, what I remember from Father Myron telling me is that he was born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky. He went to St. Agnes Parish, our parish there. And when he was growing up, a lot of his classmates were going to the seminary. And he said to himself, well, if they could do it, I guess I can too. So he joined the Passionists. Now, he wasn't a great preacher, but he was a good Passionist. And so I looked at myself, I said, well, I guess if Father Myron could do it, I guess I can too. So I finished the visit. I took my vows with 3 other guys. One of the guys left in the middle of the year, but 4 of us stayed. We all took temporary vows, and we all went to CTU, Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. Now, CTU is where a lot of men's religious orders send their guys as seminarians, send their guys who train for ordination, or send their guys to get some theology degree or whatever it is. But CTU also has classes that have a lot of lay people, have a lot of lay men, lay women, women religious, and so forth. So a lot of people, a lot of different people went to these classes. A lot of guys from different cultures and so forth and so on went to CTU. So when I would take these classes with some of these guys from these other religious orders or whatever, I would notice that these guys were great guys. But these guys were great guys. They were people persons. They were intelligent. They were compassionate, so forth. These are great guys. Everything that you want to see in a priest, anything you want to see in a religious, these guys had all the qualities that you were looking for a good priest or a good religious. But some of them left. Some of them left. And I see all these good guys going, and I'm still here. But the thing is that I realized it wasn't about the fact that they had all the characteristics and all the traits and all the gifts and talents that you would want to have to see in a priest or a religious. They just weren't called. They just weren't called to that. They weren't called to religious life. They weren't called to the priesthood. They were called to something else. It isn't that they were less than what I thought they were. They were still great guys. But they just weren't called. So it really isn't about whether we think we're worthy or not. It isn't even really about whether we think we have all that it takes to be this or that or the other. It's about whether we're called. Now sometimes if we take a hard look, if we really pray about this and think about this, sometimes we may think, well, we may be like Moses. Who am I? What have I got to offer? You know, why would God be calling me? So I'd like to read to you another passage from the Gospels. This is from John chapter 6. After this, Jesus went across the Sea of Galilee of Tiberias. A large crowd followed him because they saw the signs he was performing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. The Jewish feast of Passover was near. When Jesus raised his eyes and saw that a large crowd was coming to him, he said to Philip. Now, if you ever doubt that Jesus has a sense of humor, you read the Gospels. Because when I read this passage, I just imagine Jesus, he's got a twinkle in his eye. He's almost got a mischievous glint in his eye when he talks to Philip. He says, so he said to Philip, where can we buy enough food for them to eat? He said this to test him, because he himself knew what he was going to do. Philip answered him, 200 days' wages worth of food would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, the brother of Simon Peter, said to him, there is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good are these for so many? Jesus said, have the people recline. Now there was a great deal of grass in that place, so the men reclined, about 5,000 in number. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed them to those who were reclining, and also as much of the fish as they wanted. When they had had their fill, he said to his disciples, gather the fragments left over so that nothing will be wasted. So they collected them and filled 12 wicker baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves that had been more than they could eat. When the people saw the sign he had done, they said, this is truly the prophet, the one who is to come into the world. You know, when we look at our world, and we look at all the troubles and the turmoil in our world, we look at poverty, we look at violence, we look at war, we look at acts of terrorism, senseless acts of violence, people killing each other, you know, a guy in a van running off into the sidewalk to kill people just recently, you know, school shootings, all the rest, all the stuff that's going on in our world. And again, if we think seriously about our vocation, we think seriously about our call, we may be like Andrew. We may be like Andrew. You look at all the problems, all the needs of the world, and we may be like Andrew. Who am I? Who am I for the needs of so many? Who am I to do anything about what's going on in the world? I'm not anybody. I don't have anything to offer. Who am I? But look at what Jesus does. You know, Andrew comes and says, well, there's one kid, there's at least somebody who remembered to bring something. Must be the only 1,000 people. He must be the only one, but here he is. But he's only 5 loaves and 2 fish. What is that? And Jesus multiplies the 5 loaves and the 2 fish to literally feed thousands of people. And again, if we think we only got a little bit to offer, or we think we don't have anything that's going to make any kind of difference in the world, or make any kind of difference in what's going on in the world, Jesus can multiply what we have so that people's needs are met, so that people know God's love. Now, in my life, I have not seen a miraculous multiplication of loaves and fish to feed thousands of people, but I have seen this kind of God do this kind of thing. Again, when I was a pastor in Alabama, I was a pastor at St. Mary's in Fairfield, Alabama. Fairfield is right next to the Ensley section of Birmingham. So Fairfield's about 10,000 people. It's got about 46 churches in Fairfield. So the mayor at that time, he wanted to have a prayer celebration for New Year's Eve going into the new millennium. Now, a lot of Protestant churches that watch night service on New Year's Eve, that's a kind of a tradition. So he wanted to have that, want to have an ecumenical thing where all the ministers of all the churches, or many churches wanted to come, would have this prayer service on New Year's Eve. So December 31st, 1999. So we had this prayer service and this wonderful experience, but after that, some of the pastors in the town who already were getting together somewhat wanted to get together and pool their resources so that they could meet the needs of people. One of the UMC, or the United Methodist Churches, was running a food pantry, and they couldn't do that on their own anymore. So the group took it up. And so every month, St. Mary's would send in a small donation. The Presbyterian Church would send in a small donation. A couple of United Methodist churches would send in a small donation. First Baptist of Fairfield, Fairfield First Baptist, Christ Episcopal, Christ Charismatic Episcopal, Antioch, all of a sudden. Well, you get the idea, right? So here we are, we have our little donations, but when we put them all together, all of a sudden we could feed hundreds of people every month, and we could help some people pay their bills. You ever heard that expression, the whole is larger than the sum of the parts? That's what God did. He made the whole greater than the sum of the parts. See, God can multiply what little we think we have to offer so that people's needs are met. See, what I'm really saying is a very humbling thing. In a way, it really doesn't matter what we think. It's about what God knows. And sometimes it's just a matter of doing what we can where we are. When I was in novitiate in Shrewsbury, the retreat house where we had our novitiate was down the road from a nursing home. And I can't remember why we went, but we went, the novices went, and we went to Mass there. And there was a principal celebrant at Mass, but there were 3 older priests in wheelchairs. And so when the priest raised the host for the consecration, these 3 old priests raised their hands and signed a celebration. And it just hit me. These guys were old. These guys didn't get around much, obviously. But they were still giving of themselves. And sometimes we may not even be aware of what we can give. There was an article I read when I was at CTU, which I still have with me. It was written by a nun about the sick. And she was saying, when we think of people who are sick and ill, we think about how are we going to take care of them? What are we going to do for them? How are we going to make sure that they're okay? How are we going to make sure that their needs are met and so forth and so on? We think about all the things that we're supposed to be doing or what we could be doing or how we're going to arrange doing things for them. And that's perfectly appropriate. That's what needs to be done. But she also said that sometimes that blinds us to the gifts that they give us. Because when someone who is ill perseveres in their faith. When someone who feels chronic pain every day, and they keep on keeping on, that's a witness to the rest of us. That's a witness about how to keep the faith even when you're carrying your cross. So they're actually giving something to us while we're thinking that it's all about what we're giving to them. But that's how God works. Sometimes it's a matter of just giving where we can, where we are. What we can, where we are. There's a story in the Gospel. Jesus is in the temple and he looks at people putting their money into the treasury. And then there's this old widow. Obviously a widow, she's got 2 little coins. She puts 2 copper coins in the treasury, and Jesus calls his disciples over and says, look, you see that old widow over there? She gave more than all these other people because she gave out of her poverty. She gave everything she had. And I think that's what God is calling us to do, give out of our poverty. Because in some ways, we all have poverty in our lives. Some ways, we're lacking in something. You know, it may be our limitations, it may be our sins, it may be the things that we've done, so forth and so on. We all have some poverty in our lives. And God says, you know what? I know that you have gifts and talents and skills. I know that you have them because I gave them to you. But I'm not only going to use the gifts and talents that you have, I'm going to use the things that maybe you're not so proud of. I'm going to use the things that maybe you try to hide away from the rest of the world. I'm going to use that so you can help somebody else. You see, for me, one of the most clear examples of that is alcoholic in recovery. Right? Alcoholic in recovery, if they get into the 12-step program, they got to take a 4th step, which is they got to take a rigorous moral inventory of everything they've ever done. And the 5th step is to share it with themselves, God, and another human being. But when they go through that 4th step, you know, they bring up stuff that maybe they're not that proud of. You know, when a lot of guys hit bottom, they really hit bottom. And they lose everything. They lose their job, they lose their spouse, they lose their family, they lose everything before they surrender to God, before they surrender to a higher power. Now you think you might want to hide that from the rest of the world. But a lot of times it's only someone who has gone through that who can reach someone who's going through it right now. God will use that poverty to help somebody else. Sometimes I think of people who are grieving. And sometimes people grieve for a long time. And their friends and their family, the rest of their family members try to cheer them up. They try to get them out of it, get them out, so forth and so on, try to help them snap out of it. And the person who's grieving, kind of says, you don't understand. You don't understand what I'm going through. I can't snap out of it. At least not now, I can't snap out of it. But maybe it's only a person going through that who can help somebody else who's grieving the same way. Henry Nouwen called it being a wounded healer. We're all wounded, but we're called to heal. And God will sometimes use our woundedness to help heal somebody else. That's the power of God. That's the power of God. It's about doing what we can where we are. Maybe some of you here were the chief cook and bottle washers of St. So-and-so parish. and you did everything, or you thought you did everything. It felt like you did everything. And, when Father wanted somebody to do it, he knew how busy you were, but it didn't matter because he knew even though how busy you were going to get it done. So he'd go to you when he wanted something done. And maybe now you're not the chief cook or bottle washer anymore. And unfortunately in our society, and I think maybe especially even among men, when you can't do as much, very often the world says you're not worth as much. And so, but maybe you can still, there's something you can do. Now, again, I know people who had a particular ministry in a parish for 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. They don't do it anymore, so they hand it off to somebody else. But every time they see that somebody else do the job, they kind of shake their head. They kind of wince. They kind of grimace. They kind of say, oh, no, we didn't do it that way. I never did it that way. That wasn't the way we used to do it. But maybe instead of shaking your head, maybe you just give them an encouraging word, because you know how tough it was to do it and to keep doing it. And maybe even though it's not getting done the same way you did it, it's still getting done. We do what we can where we are. Even though Father David and Father Jim and I started novitiate together, Father Jim was a member in the Eastern Province, I took a year off from seminary and I actually came here to get some ministry experience in the 90s. So Father Jim and David got ordained the same year, a year before I did. So when I got ordained, I was by myself. Or when I took final vows, I was by myself. And so the reading that I wanted, the gospel reading that I chose, see, when you're in this kind of position, you can choose the readings for the Mass. It's a great thing. You don't have to ask anybody else's opinion. You just go ahead and whatever. So I chose Mark chapter 5, Gerasene demoniac. Why did you choose a Gerasene demoniac? All right, I'll tell you why. The story of Gerasene demoniac is there's a story about this man. He's possessed by a demon. It winds up being demons. He's possessed by demons, and no matter what the people do, they try to bind him in chains, they try to bind him or whatever. However they try to bind him, he breaks the chains, and he goes off and he bruises himself on the stones and the rocks. How often do we bruise ourselves on stones like, I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough, or nobody thinks well of me, or nobody loves me, or whatever it is. How often do we bruise ourselves on stones like that? So he's running off, he's bruising himself on the stones. He comes and he winds up facing Jesus. And Jesus begins to drive the demons out of the man. It says, what's your name? And they say, Legion. And they say, Jesus, don't send us far away. Can't you just send us somewhere close by? How about those pigs over there? So Jesus sends them into the pigs. They go into the pigs run off the cliff, and they drown. Don't ask me why, I don't know. But the thing is that the people, hearing all this noise and commotion, the people come and they see the dead pigs in the water. You see this guy who was crazy, and now he seems to be in his right mind. And they say to Jesus, maybe you better leave. Because they're scared. They don't know what to make of this. They're scared. Jesus, why don't you just go? So Jesus gets ready to go. And the guy said, I want to come with you. I want to come with you. Jesus says, no, you can't go with me, but I tell you what you do. Go home and tell them what God has done for you. Now, what I'm going to say now, I hope does not offend anybody here. because I'm afraid that it could be misconstrued as I'm trivializing the situation. You ever have a time when you're kind of feeling down or in a funk or something like that, and somebody, hey, it's not so bad, it's all right, or whatever, and you're just not in the mood. So I don't want to come across like this, because what I'm going to say is not a guarantee of anything. But I know people come to faith, and people come to Father Pat, and people come to myself, and sometimes they're in great anguish because their children or their grandchildren don't go to church. And they're in great anguish because they don't know where they strayed, where was the mistake, where did we go wrong, so forth and so on. And for me, the thing that makes the most sense to me is maybe it's just a matter of going home and telling them what God has done for you. I can memorize the Bible from Genesis 1 to Revelation 21, but that's not necessarily going to touch anybody. I can impress people by how well I know the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I can impress people by how well I know the doctrines of the Church and the rules of the Church and so forth and so on. But that's not going to get me anywhere. I think the only thing that makes sense is telling people what God has done for me. I go to church. Why do I go to church? Because I believe that God loves me and the world so much that the Son of God became just like me. And He suffered and He died so that my sins would be forgiven. And He rose from the dead so that I would have a promise of everlasting life. I go to church because I want to be with my brothers and sisters. And I want to come together as a community. I go to church because I want to experience this incredible thing where I can share in the sacrifice of Jesus and actually can have such an intimate encounter with Him that I literally take His body and blood into myself. But I also go to church because I know what God has done for me outside of Sunday morning. The times when I was sick and I didn't know if I'd pull through, and my family didn't know whether I'd pull through, and God brought me through. The times when I faced a crisis and I could not see the end, I could not see the light at the end of the tunnel. I could not see how I was going to fix this, how I was going to take care of this. And God saw me through. There's a phrase in the South which I love. It says, God makes a way when there is no way. That's why I go to church. Because God has acted in my life. Because God has shown me mercy over and over and over again. God has not given me just a second chance. He's given me a 5th chance, and a 10th chance, and a 100th chance. That's why I go to church. Because I know what God has done for me. Now again, there's no guarantee that that would get anywhere. You can't force anybody's response to that. But to me, it just makes more sense than trying to quote the Bible or quote the rules of the church or tell them that they're going to go to hell if they don't. It's a matter of go home. It is as it is. It's nothing spectacular, right? What God is calling to do probably will not get us on the 6 o'clock news, will not get us on page 3 of the Detroit Free Press. It may just be a matter of going home and telling them what God has done for you. See, again, it doesn't matter whether we think we're worthy. It doesn't matter whether we think we have anything to offer. It's what God knows. And God is calling us. And it may just be a little thing. And maybe that's all that we can do at a particular time in a particular space, but that's okay. Because God is with us. God is calling us.